They're here, everyone. They are the smart kids at the shops with their mothers or fathers, riding their bikes around the streets and playing down by the river, as well as talking to their friends on their smartphones. Join the smart kids each week as they discover, explore, and solve the mysteries of today. Here's your host, JT Crowley.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smart Kids Show. And this is John, and my guest this week is Daniel Hare, who, like me, lives in the UK. And Daniel has written a duology under the title The Processions. Now, Daniel and I share something in common, and that is that we both had a great affinity for Tolkien's book, The Lord of the Rings, the trilogy, and of course the introduction book, The Hobbit Bilbo Baggins. So Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Very, very good to be here. Nice to talk to you, John.
Yes. Now the other listeners don't know the hassle that we've had to connect up this morning. But,
yeah, we won't mention that.
We won't mention that. One's a software engineer, and one's quite a reasonably intelligent person. And could we connect? No. But there you go, kids. That's all. That's life, isn't it? So Daniel, I've looked at your books and I'm very interested to learn about what brought you to writing. Yeah,
sure. So I suppose primarily it was an escape from the glamour of software verification. It's the desire to do something slightly more creative. And I think mainly for me, it sort of themes. I had themes I wanted to explore through my work, and those themes came from views on the world, personal experiences, thoughts and opinions, and overcoming hardships, and maybe sharing that kind of story in a written form. So that was kind of the serious aspect to it. The fun aspect was, because it's a fantasy genre, you get to build the world from the ground up and populate that world. And being, like you say, a fan of books such as Lord of the Rings, the opportunity to build that world and fill it with my own characters was the fun part. So it was a mixture of wanting to get something off my chest and explore something and share something.
You see, for me, it was, I don't know if I told you this, but I used to work for a bank, and we used to, every Friday nights, we'd go to, four of us, we'd go to the pub, and there was a couple of lads, the same gang of four, and we said, what would we do if we didn't, work in a bank? And one said he'd do a mortgage advisory company, which he's set up, and somebody said they're going to do something else. Somebody said they were going to do their own financial services business, which they've done. And I said I want to write children's books, but I've got no idea how to go about it. And they went on, and when I left, they bought me a present for a course at the Quad in Derby, a creative writing course, and that's where I started.
Okay, awesome.
But when I was a kid, Daniel, I hated reading.
Oh, really?
I was a teacher, and she would pull her hair out of me.
Right. Oh, okay.
But that's what I tell all the kids when I go into schools, I tell them I hated reading and I hated writing, and how I struggled with it throughout life, and then decided to do something about it. And here I am, from hating reading, writing, to learn to read and write, to actually, that book out to smart kids.
Yeah, it's fantastic, yeah.
Now, we all have a journey, don't we?
Yeah, that's right.
So I'm going to ask you, did you as a child love reading books?
Yes, I did, most definitely.
Apart from Tolkien.
Apart from Tolkien. So it I guess it was all within the same genre. I mean, reading for pleasure, we had to read, some of the classics for school, but talking about reading for pleasure. So there was a similar book called The Dragonlance Chronicles, which was another trilogy. And what that had in common with The Lord of the Rings was this huge cast of characters all experiencing the same events together, but each character reacted differently to to those events, and you see something of yourself in one of those characters. So the more characters, the more scope there is for you to relate to one of those characters and immerse yourself in the writing. So I can remember as kids us discussing who was the best character in these novels, and of course that in retrospect must have been where we saw ourselves, either our deficiencies or what we aspired to be in these just made up people. So so I did really enjoy reading as a kid. I preferred it to going to school quite often.
What about Enid Blyton? Because I loved Enid Blyton, and I'm not ashamed to say that.
No, I read Enid Blyton 5 do such and such. And,
Loved them.
Yeah.
Daniel, on some of my previous podcast shows, I've been talking to the kids and people in general, how I create my characters. Now, I have a system where I use 14 points to create the character. How do you create your characters? What do you use?
Yes, nothing as sophisticated as that, I'm afraid. So I think for me, because I was trying to share my own or document and explore my own personal experiences, I needed primarily a character that saw through my eyes, albeit in a fantasy world. So the first character I created, I see a lot of myself in. So that was quite easy. Sorry.
I was going to ask you that. Is there part of you in this main character in the book?
Yes, most definitely. So how you felt at different times in your life might give you a basis for the plot. The main character had to sort of be channel me to a certain extent, and then the characters around them. There has to be conflict, so you have to have someone contesting the opinions of the main character, perhaps, and so you get an array of different character types, which weren't based on people in my life. They were more based on shared character traits that you see in all people around you, and that gives them a greater element of realism and hopefully the reader can relate.
You have to be a great observer to be a writer, don't you?
I think so, yeah.
You observe and pick things up and go,
Yeah, store it away for later.
Yeah, I mean, I my previous podcast, I've always told the kids, from my book, The Smart Kids, that I use a triangle of characters. And I relate this back to Harry Potter. You've got your main character, Harry Potter, and then you've got your sub-characters, as I call them. This is what I tell all the kids, so they've got Hermione and they've got Ron Weasley. So there's your triangle, I said, kids. The main character, and then the two under, sub-characters supporting the main character. And as you said, you've got your main character, and then you've got other characters there to, keep the story, the twists going, and conflict with the main character. That's how. So I think you use that as well, but not so pronounced. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yeah, maybe the same sort of thoughts, but a different framework. I also, some characters just invented themselves, just created themselves. So that actually the main protagonist, the main antagonist, the villain, he at inception, he was just someone to have a point of view, to regard the King's champion Brester, because Brester is enigmatic. The book's about trying to find him. So I couldn't have a point of view from Brester because that revealed too much about him. So Rianthan is just supposed to be the one survivor of Brester's attack on this tower. So he does survive, and how he survived, the levels he was willing to stoop to survive, just fleshed out this wonderful character that I couldn't let go.
I noticed that, and you use, like me as well, I call them floating characters. And when I go to the schools, to the kids, I tell them these are the characters that they come into the story and then they go out of the story, but they're just there to move the storyline along.
Yeah.
And I know you've got some of those in your book as well.
Yes, that's right. There's one particular character who, and she just exists basically to highlight the main villain's cruelty. So she comes and goes. So some were planned. Some just jumped out. So
I think like yourself in your book, how I set up my books, the formulas, it's there as well as in your book, but probably not as defined. I've got the kids listening on the podcast. This is why I make it very clear to them: main character, two to three sub characters, no more than that, and then have all the floating characters that you want to move the story along. But your main character, because somebody will pick this up. I don't know if you find this, Daniel. If you tell them, so the character's got a red scarf or a brown scarf, and then, a couple of paragraphs down, you've changed the colour of the scarf because you've forgotten what colour the scarf is, somebody's going to pick it up.
Yes.
And that's why you need all the points to, go back to as a reference to. That's how I find. Yeah. Do you go back to a reference on a character?
Yes. So, not my first draft. My first draft was just getting some kind of framework down that would make some kind of coherent sense. But certainly on later drafts, I'd go back and each character, like Sienna, one of the characters, has I think originally had blonde hair in the first few chapters, which miraculously changed to brown in the later parts of the book. So I had to go back in and on the spreadsheet.
Putting the reference in from the start, yes.
Yes,
and
yeah. Yes, that's it. So, that brings, me to an interesting realisation I had when I've never written before. This is my first attempt. I can remember reading a book, and as a reader, time's linear, and you get to the end of the book and you think, wow, how did that author pull it all together? Because I remember clues and hints and things from the beginning of the book which have come to fruition in such a beautiful, intertwined way. Well, having written a book, you see as the author you can move back and forth through time. You're not on that linear path. So there's scope, in a practical sense. Yes, go revisit the past to set things up for the future, which you just can't. That's some of the magic you see as the reader. Yeah.
But can I move you on, Daniel, from the characters? Can we move on to the plot?
Yeah.
Because you started to go on to that a little bit there, and I'm thinking, yes, he's read the questions here. Daniel, I split the plot into two. And when I my podcast, I tell the kids I do it in two ways. One section of the plot is scenery, and the other the storyline. And in the scenery bit, I've got like the geographical place in the world. I put the character, the climate, the scenery, the time of the year. The time of the what time of the is it a modern story or is it an old story? Is it in the 50s or is it today? So that's one section. And then the other section is, well, the actual storyline itself, the plot. So how do you do it?
Okay, so I think I rely on visual aids in this regard. So I just had a huge bit of paper. I tried it on technology, on computing that, but yeah, went back to a big bit of paper. And so I had a series of main events where there might have been dialogue between characters, just things which moved the plot along, so things that had to happen. And the plot for me was a vehicle for the theme, so the theme was getting explored as the plot was moving along. So I'll draw big circles with these main events written in them, locations that I'd seen in the real world, and walked around in person and thought, wow, I can see my characters sat here in this ruined castle, in this fireplace sheltering from a storm, and that's where they should talk about this. So that all went down on the paper, and then overlay that with chapters. So geographically, where are they for the first 3 chapters? Where are they when they have this wonderful piece of dialogue, or they witness this thing happening to them, happening around them, which changes them. So each chapter then had objectives. So I wrote down the objectives of each chapter. So using the same example, they had to have witnessed this thing. They had to have had this conversation. And the rest did itself. So I can remember getting to an end of the chapter thinking I couldn't type quick enough for what was forming in my mind. But I didn't feel like I was forming it. As weird as that sounds, it came in the moment and I had to get it down because it was far better than I could have ever planned for. So there were a lot of moments like that as well.
Do you see, when you're writing, do you actually see the scene as if you are in a film? Can you see that?
Yes, I can. Yeah, I can really put myself there. Especially so if I've actually visited the place that gave me the inspiration for it. But that isn't a necessity. Yeah, I can see where people are standing. So in a fight sequence, for example, you can't write one person's engaged an enemy to the point of view person's left, and then suddenly they jump behind them. It's you've got to kind of map it out, and I used, again, visual aids, sort of tokens on a bit of paper which represented the characters and their adversaries. So, yeah, but it does play like a film. I agree with that, yeah.
Yeah, because I know exactly where the character sits, to the left or to the right.
Yeah.
I've got that in up here.
Yeah.
And I just wonder if you do that as well. So listening to what you've said, you pretty much do the same as I do. I think you've already preempted this one as well. My editor used to say to me, you need to sit down and put the plot down in detail so as you know what's going to go into each chapter. And so he says, yeah, some authors do that. They plan it to the end, the story, the plot to the nth detail before they even start writing the story. And then you've got other people at the other end of the scale who says, a bit like you, that referring to me, whereby you just look at a blank screen and create it as it goes along. And you know where the start is, you know where the end is, but the bit in the middle goes as, because I would be very bored if I knew what it was all the time. So I find it fascinating just to see, where's this going today?
Yeah.
Where do you sit on that line? Are you the detailed person, or let's see where it goes?
Again, because this is my first attempt at writing a novel, I started believing I was more the detail person. So I put together, a lot of documentation of how things were going to go. But as I started writing, I realised I'm more write as it comes, if I can put it that way. I think my main objective was to get to the end of the first draft, and so however that came, that was sitting down in sessions and just letting things happen, being kind of aware of the objectives I've set myself from a plot, but how those objectives were met was quite fluid and diverted away from any planning a lot of the time. So I think I've learned that I'm more that way.
A lot of kids ask me, do you write in the morning or the evening or the afternoon? And because we all ask if you get writer's block. I don't. I just get distracted all the time with life.
Yeah. That's a good way to put it, yeah.
And Do you use the formula, Daniel? Like I use like 10% for the start, 80% the storyline itself, the plot, and 10%, the ending, pulling it together. And that's what I tell all the kids, 10, 80, 10. Do you use that formula or something different?
No, that's very interesting. No, I can't say I do. I see myself as having a lot to learn from more experienced authors. So I've never considered what you've just described, but that's definitely something to think on. I think if it can use the word organically, and maybe with naivety, I just ploughed into it without that kind of thought.
Because would you agree with me or not that you need a very strong start?
Yes, especially with fantasy fiction.
Wrong to read your story if after the first chapter or maybe the second chapter they're not engaging with the characters or the storyline, you've lost that reader and they're not going to read the rest of the book. Would you agree?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, definitely so. And also having experienced the process of trying to get off the slush pile. So trying to capture an agent's attention. I was very aware that my what I was submitting, i.e. my first few chapters, the start of my book, should be immediately immersive. So I tried to drop the reader into action straight away. Because it's a fantasy world, the rules aren't clear. It's not a period in time or a modern day book, so the rules aren't clear to the reader. So you mustn't make it so they have a textbook to read before they can start getting immersed in the story. So immersion, I think, and I find it easy to build the world through dialogue between characters that already live there.
I totally agree with you. Who do you see as your market? Who do you write for?
Probably that very confusing time in life between being a teenager and turning into an adult, and all the the confusion that comes with that period in our lives. I mean, I'd say from that age onwards. So it's kind of a story of discovery and overcoming obstacles and things like that. So I think if it resonates with anyone from that age older, then fantasy fans, it's a fantasy genre, but it could have been set in the Upper East in New York. I like to think the themes there will resonate with any adult and young adult. But
Do you have any plans to write any other books? Is there something in the pipeline coming down the line?
Yes, I swore to myself that the end of the Procession would be the end for those characters, because I challenge my readers to break any attachments they have to any of the characters in the story. I try and create those attachments and then challenge the reader to break them. A kind of acceptance of finality. I, however, completely fail with that, and I don't break my attachments to these characters I've breathed life into and that have progressed themselves. So at least some of them will return. And because my writing's based on personal experience, there's always fuel for another story. There has to be. And next weekend, I'm off to the Wye Valley to do a long walk, and I'll stop and I'll look at places and get inspiration for, like I was saying before, locations and dialogues and things like that.
In my books, Daniel, at Smart Kids, I've got the 17 characters, the 17 short stories, and the characters are all around the world. I've been to lots of those places.
Yeah.
So when I'm talking to the kids about the place, I know exactly where it is. I remember where the table was. I can remember all the scenery. Yeah. And even from years ago, I can still remember it, and I've brought it back into the storylines, because mine's more adventures and just telling kids about different kids from different parts of the world. And I just find it fascinating. And so, yes, for me, Smart Kids was my first book as well. And I'm working on a spy book at the moment. I've got to the end of it, so that's the first draft. Hurrah!
Congratulations.
Hard work.
Yes.
And this one I want to take to a literary agent. Daniel, if somebody, where can people get your ebooks or your books, or where can they go? Is it Amazon or is it bookshops? Tell me.
It's mainly Amazon. I can't remember the names of the other sites. So they're on Amazon. So the Procession's broken, as you said, down into two books, which is the Gloaming, and the second one's Adorning. And they're on Amazon in ebook format. And there's links through my Facebook page, which is author of the Procession. So
Well, Daniel, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I've certainly learnt a lot about you and your books and your style of writing and how you do it. And I found it great chatting to somebody who, like myself, this is their first attempt.
Yeah, that's been
and I know a lot of authors like to talk to people who've doing their first book, how they do it, how they create it, how they go about selling it. And somebody once said to me, Daniel, that if you think 80% of the work is actually writing the book, oh no, it isn't. 20% is writing the book, 80% is getting yourself out there, getting known, and getting the book sold.
Yeah. So
there's more in the pipeline, as you said. I can't wait to read them. And it's been absolutely, now that we have seen each other face to face on Zoom, of course, something this time last year ago not many people heard about, but there you go. That's life.
Yeah.
So I just want to say, there you go, everybody. This has been Daniel Hare, and talking about his duology, the Processions, which you can get on Amazon, the ebooks there, or you can FaceTime him, Facebook him, and he'll tell you where any other places you can go and get the book. So next week, kids, I'm going to be talking to another author to interview. And this gentleman is called David, and he's from New York. And a lot of you don't know, kids, is that my mum came from New York, and from Manhattan, in actual fact. And I love New York. You either love it or hate it, I'm afraid. It's full in your face. It's very brash. And I know Mary comes from New York, and it's her hometown as well. So there is a link there. So for now, thank you ever so much, guys, for listening. And I hope you stay safe till next week, when I have a chat with David about his books. And he is from New York. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks for listening to The Smart Kids. Want to follow more of their adventures? Check out The Smart Kids by J.T. Crowley on Amazon.com now.